Welcome to TN Shadow Stories. It all started with what seemed like a bargain. 2 cheap properties tucked away in a quiet countryside town. But I had no idea. Beneath that peaceful ground, restless spirits were waiting. A Native American girl murdered, an ancient ritual never completed, and a presence one that cannot be burned, nor buried, slowly rising again. This is not fiction. This is what I saw with my own eyes. Now, let's go back to where it all began. I never thought my life would take such a turn. I'm a practical person, believing in balance sheets more than the spiritual world. But there's one thing I can't deny since buying these 2 properties. Everything in my life has changed. Forever. I'm talking about 2 properties. A small house where I live, and a business premises just about 3 miles away, both located in a quiet rural area. Once part of a large farm that was parceled out decades ago, at first, I just saw it as a good investment opportunity. Quiet space, no close neighbors, no noisy traffic. For me, it was a paradise to retreat from the city, work independently, and live a peaceful life. I didn't know that very quietness was the first thing that made me notice strange sounds. The house where I live isn't large, 2 bedrooms, a small living room, kitchen, and bathroom. Built in the 1960s, it's nestled among maple and pine trees in autumn. The entire forest seems submerged in a sea of fiery yellow leaves. At night, it's so quiet here you can clearly hear the wind blowing through the gaps in the leaves. When I first moved in, I felt fine. Maybe too quiet, but I thought I just wasn't used to it. No crickets, no hooting owls, just wind and sometimes a sound rubbing against the window. My business premises is an old barn about 3 miles from my house, converted into a workshop where I make handmade equipment and store small goods. The building has 2 floors. The lower floor is storage. The upper floor is the workspace, with old wooden stairs leading up. Every day, I am there from morning until afternoon. On some gloomy afternoons, when I was alone in that large space, I felt as if eyes were watching me from downstairs. The feeling wasn't clear, but it lingered so persistently that I had to stop what I was doing. Turn my head, only to see an empty space behind me. I always locked the door every time I worked, but sometimes I still felt that in that space, there was a presence I couldn't control. Everything really started to change one early autumn afternoon last year. I returned home after a long day at the workshop. It was raining lightly, the air was damp and cold. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I suddenly heard something outside the window, a dry crack, like a branch breaking. I sat still. Maybe a falling branch, I told myself, but a few seconds later, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path in front of the house. The footsteps weren't hurried, each step clear as if someone was walking around my house. From the side, circling towards the main door, I stood up, pulled the curtain to look out, but saw no one. Then suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew through the house, unlike any wind I had ever seen. It made the window bang against the wall, and then the front door burst open, making a heavy thud. Panicked, I rushed to close the door, and what sent shivers down my spine was that the deadbolt was still locked. I stood frozen for a few seconds. The door couldn't have opened by itself unless someone opened it from the inside, but it was clearly open from inside the house. I was no longer alone. I have a Shetland sheepdog named Toby. He's an early warning dog, barking even at small sounds. But that night, Toby didn't bark. He crawled under the table, whimpering and urinating on the floor. I had never seen him like that, never. I started to feel a chill down my spine. The air in the house at that moment was thick, like static electricity in the air. I checked every room, from the bedroom to the bathroom. All were normal until I entered the kitchen. The oak dining table, more than 2 meters long, the kind of table that only I and another person together could move, had been shifted almost 20 centimeters askew, leaving a clear, long trail on the tiled floor. I clearly remembered not touching it all day. I began to wonder, am I imagining things? Maybe the wind was really strong. Toby had a stomach ache, and the floor was uneven. Everything could be logical if I tried to think that way. But deep down, I knew. No wind could open a locked door. And Toby had never whimpered so much that he peed himself from fear. I started to recall a strange night last autumn. I went hunting with an old friend. The fog was thick, and the flashlight beam only shone a few meters when we stopped to rest. I saw a figure standing in the forest, a woman with long hair, motionless, standing still in the mist, less than 15 meters from us. I remember the light from the flashlight reflecting in her eyes, and then, in a blink, she disappeared. At the time, I thought I was tired. The light and fog caused hallucinations, but now I'm not so sure anymore. A month ago, I met an elderly woman who introduced herself as a clairvoyant. She came to my door one afternoon unannounced. I almost closed the door, thinking it was a scam. But her first sentence froze me. There is a Native American girl who was killed and buried in the forest behind your house, and she's trying to find someone to protect herself from the one who tormented her, even in death. He still hasn't let go. I don't know how she knew. I had never told anyone about the strange experience in the forest, or about what was happening in my house, but the way she looked at me, it was as if she knew everything. Her voice was steady, clear, as if she was used to talking about things I was still trying to deny. She also said, "Things have only just begun, and there will be a confrontation, not between the living and the dead, but between justice and the relentless tormentor." Since then, I started piecing everything together. The shadows, the sounds, the feeling of being watched, and even the experience at the workshop, which I hadn't told anyone about. I don't know what awaits me, but I have a clear feeling that this isn't a normal spirit. It has a purpose, and I'm just caught in the middle. If you ever thought that just by closing the door, the outside world wouldn't touch you, I'm afraid you're wrong. There are things that don't need doors to enter. There are entities that don't need a physical body to exist. And when you live on land with a bloody history, they will find you. I can never forget that night, even weeks later, the slamming door, the footsteps on the gravel, and the panicked look in my small dog's eyes are still vivid in my mind. I started noting down every event, date, and the smallest detail, as if writing it down could help me understand what was really happening. A week after that night, I decided to go back to the business premises to clean up a few more things in the basement storage. It was raining that day. The raindrops pattering on the old tin roof made the already cold air even more chilling. I didn't like being there alone, especially after seeing the tall man in the black suit. But I had to finish the work. And perhaps, just perhaps, I had imagined everything. I walked down the wooden stairs, carrying a flashlight and a long wooden stick, not for self-defense, but to feel safer. The dim light from the ceiling bulb wasn't enough to illuminate the entire vast, gloomy basement, but enough for me to see long shadows cast on the walls. I was checking an old shelf when I heard a creak on the floor above. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. I stood still, trying not to breathe loudly. Only I had the key. No one else could get in. Unless I backed away, hand gripping the stick tightly. The footsteps stopped directly above my head. Then a long scraping sound, like metal dragging across the floor. I looked up, my flashlight beam trembling as it shone on the ceiling. Suddenly, everything went silent. I quickly ran upstairs. Checking every room, no one was there. The main door was still locked. But one thing sent shivers down my spine on the wooden floor were long, fresh scratches, leading straight from the stairs to the office at the back. I left that night, carrying the stick and a growing fear. Every time I turned my back on this place, it felt like someone was watching me, something not of this world. The next day, I called Jenna, an old friend who studied parapsychology in college. She lived a 3-hour drive away, but when I recounted everything, her voice suddenly became serious. "You're dealing with a vengeful spirit," Jenna said, "and possibly more than one." I told her about the clairvoyant, about the Native American girl buried in the forest, about the prophecy of a confrontation. Jenna was silent for a long time, then asked, "Do you still remember the location of that forest?" I nodded, though she couldn't see me. The forest was less than a mile from my house. Part of that land used to belong to the large farm. Before it was separated into 2 properties, there was a low, swampy area in the forest where no trees seemed to grow. Every time I passed it, I felt a chill down my spine. Jenna decided she would come over that weekend while waiting. I re-examined the old property documents, something I hadn't paid much attention to before. In an old file, I found a rudimentary map of the farm from the early 1900s. What stunned me was both of my current properties, the house and the business premises, had once been part of a plot of land surrounding a small Native American cemetery. That cemetery was no longer marked on modern maps. It seemed people had tried to erase it. Jenna arrived on Saturday afternoon. She carried a large bag containing all sorts of strange items, an EMF meter, an antique compass, black candles, a small hand drum, and a bundle of sage, as soon as she entered my house. She frowned. "The air in here. It's like static electricity, and it's cold, a strange kind of cold." We began our exploration from the private house. Jenna walked around each room, quietly scanning with the EMF meter. When she reached the window where I had heard the wind and footsteps that night, the EMF lights immediately turned red. She sat down, placing her hand on the floor. "Something came in from here," she whispered. But it didn't come from outside. It permeated the space. We continued to the business premises. As Jenna stepped into the hallway where I had seen the tall man, she paused, then slowly turned to look towards the door on the left, the door that the spirit had apparently passed through. "He's still here," she whispered, "and he's not happy." Jenna meditated in the center of the ground floor, holding the burning sage bundle. The scent diffused, but at the same time, the room's temperature suddenly dropped. I saw my breath in the air. The windows rattled. The candle on the table flickered out. I had never seen Jenna so scared. She opened her eyes, motioning for me to be silent. Then, as if from a very distant place, a deep, guttural growl echoed, like someone angrily slamming their fist to the ground. "We have to stop," Jenna said. Quickly gathering her things, we just woke something up. That night, Jenna stayed at my house. We closed all windows tightly, placed salt on the sills, and lit candles all night. She said if I really wanted to end this, I had to go to the place where the Native American girl was buried and perform a ritual of release. If the man's spirit is the one who harmed her, then he's guarding the burial site, Jenna said, and he won't let you get close. I couldn't sleep that night in the darkness. I heard the wind howl, but it wasn't like normal wind. It was like someone whispering, drawn out, whimpering. My small dog huddled under the covers, trembling, at 3 a.m. I walked out onto the porch and stood silently. The moon was dim behind a thin veil of clouds, and in the clearing of the forest ahead, I saw a shadow standing still. No movement, not a blink. I closed my eyes, hoping it was just an illusion, but when I opened them, the shadow was gone. The next morning, Jenna and I stood at the edge of the forest. The air was chilly, dew still clinging to the pine branches and the thick moss on the ground. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. The light just enough to see the narrow path leading deep inside. "Are you sure?" Jenna asked, her voice low but resolute. I nodded. "The longer we wait, the worse things get." She pointed to the cloth bag in her hand sage bundles, an antique rosary, a hand-stitched deerskin protective charm, and a small vial of holy salt. "We're not here to beg. We're here to talk, to listen. If things get out of control, you have to listen to me, understand." I nodded again, then took the first step into the forest. Beneath the dense canopy, the light receded behind me as if pushed back by an invisible force. The deeper we went, the thicker the air became, as if thousands of eyes were watching every step. We walked for nearly 20 minutes to reach the marshy patch I'd mentioned, a place where no trees grew, like a wound cut into the earth. Jenna knelt, touched the ground, and closed her eyes. "Here," she whispered. "It's much colder than the surrounding areas. This isn't a normal grave. It's a place of confinement." I didn't dare ask why she used the word confinement. Jenna began to draw a circle around the area with holy salt and sage ash, then placed the rosary in the center. She motioned for me to sit down at the edge. "Stay silent, no matter what you see, and if someone calls your name, don't answer." I suddenly felt my heart pounding in my chest as if it would explode. She spoke as if she knew for sure it would happen. Jenna began to beat the drum. The rhythm was slow, steady, like the heartbeat of the forest. She chanted something in a language I didn't understand. It sounded like wind whistling through rocks, ancient and melancholic. Then, the strangest thing happened. It wasn't a sound, not an image, but a feeling. I felt like I wasn't sitting in the forest anymore. Everything around me blurred, space warped, as if the world was bent. A girl appeared before my eyes, not visually, but in my consciousness. She stood in the middle of the clearing, long hair, dark skin, eyes as deep as night water. She didn't speak, but I heard clearly in my mind, "I cannot leave. He is still here." I couldn't move. I just sat there, listening. The girl lifted her face, and then I saw a dark, deep, purple rope mark tightly around her neck. A strong gust of wind hit, not from nature. Jenna stopped drumming. Eyes wide, she grabbed my arm and yelled, "Out of the circle, now!" I had just managed to stand up when a growl echoed from behind, like a wounded wild animal. I turned around. In the forest, a few dozen steps from where we were, a dark shadow was forming. It was tall, very tall, 1.5 times taller than a normal person. The figure was clearly male, wearing a broken top hat, dressed in a black suit, but the face was a void. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just deep, dark hollows. Jenna backed away, pulling me with her. "It's him," she whispered. "The one who harmed the girl." The shadow didn't walk. It glided, as if it didn't need legs, didn't need air. Jenna took the rosary, shouted something in Latin, and threw it towards the shadow. A small bang echoed like a clap in a vacuum. The shadow writhed, then dissipated into the air. He was gone. The girl was gone. Only the whistling wind and the trembling leaves remained. We quickly left the forest, back at the house. Jenna was almost exhausted. She slumped onto a chair, wiping cold sweat from her forehead. "He's not gone," she said. "We only made him retreat, but now he knows you." I was silent. My heart pounded. My mind reeled. "Did you feel what she wanted to say?" Jenna asked. I reflected, remembering that moment, the deep eyes and the resounding words, "I cannot leave. He is still here." I repeated it to Jenna. She sighed. "If she's confined in that place, then he, the tormentor, is the one binding her spirit. And if his spirit is strong enough to exist for 100 years, then it's possible someone performed a ritual or did something evil to prevent him from dissipating." "You mean someone deliberately kept him here?" Jenna nodded. "Perhaps the old farm owner. Or some dark ritual was performed on this land. He's not simply a spirit, but almost a transformed entity." I said nothing, but deep down, I knew one thing: this wasn't just about freeing the girl. It was about ending an evil that had survived generations. 2 days later, Jenna left, promising to return with some ancient texts and a shaman who had worked with indigenous spirits. In the meantime, I began to delve deeper into the history of this land. I went to the Old Town Library, which still kept undigitized records. An elderly staff member named Martha led me to the archives. There, I found an old newspaper article from 1912. Headline: "Native American Girl Missing Near Jefferson Farm, Suspected Murder." According to the article, a young girl named Elise, of the Modoc tribe, worked at the Jefferson family's farm as a maid. She disappeared one autumn night, and it was suspected she was raped and murdered. But no one was ever convicted. The Jefferson family denied any involvement. I swallowed hard. Jefferson. That name was the same as the original owner of the entire property I now owned. Turning a few more pages, I found a handwritten note from the sheriff at the time. The body was never found. Locals believe her spirit is still around. Some hear crying in the woods every October night. I took a copy of the note and brought it home. That night, I laid the paper on the table and quietly looked at it under the soft yellow light. Outside, the wind blew in long, sustained gusts. Not strong, but persistent, like the prolonged whisper of the past. My small dog began to whimper. It ran to the corner of the room, burrowing under the table, refusing to come out. I stood up. A sound echoed from the kitchen, the gentle clinking of dishes, as if someone had just bumped them. I walked over. The kitchen cabinet door was wide open, and on the table, neatly placed among the papers I had left out, was a dried wildflower. The kind of flower that only grows in autumn, in the forest. The weather started to turn cold quickly, even though it was only mid-October. The trees behind the house had turned vibrant red, then yellow, and were shedding their leaves. Each time the wind blew, the ground seemed to be sprinkled with another layer of dead leaves. I disliked this cold feeling, not just because of the weather, but also because it hinted at something approaching, something not of this world. Since seeing the tall Native American man's shadow at the business premises, I no longer went there alone at night. Even during the day, the place remained the same, silent and still, with the smell of old wood and the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. But at night, the atmosphere completely transformed. Sometimes, I felt as if someone was watching me from the upper floor, or even directly behind me. Even though I knew I was alone, I began arranging to install more security cameras at both properties. Not because I thought there would be a break-in, but because I needed to confirm whether I was losing my mind. A part of me didn't want to see anything at all. But another part, the stubborn and curious part, wanted to confront it, wanted to know the truth. That evening, after dinner, I sat alone in the living room, with the camera monitor on the table. I checked each area of the living room, the front door, the backyard, the hallway at the business premises, and the basement. Everything was silent. My Sheltie dog lay curled up beside me, its ears perked at every small sound. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sound like metal dragging from the monitor. The sound came from the basement camera of the business premises. I immediately zoomed in on the frame. Darkness covered the basement, with only the faint red light from the infrared lamp. But in one corner I saw something, moving, not an animal, not a person. It was too tall, and it didn't walk, it glided as if it were hovering over the ground. I stared at the screen. The entity stopped in the corner of the room, where I used to keep some old toolboxes. A faint wisp of smoke appeared, then vanished. The camera didn't lose signal, but the image was blurry and started to pixelate. My heart pounded. I wasn't sure if that was something I had just imagined, or if it had truly happened. I rewound the video and this time turned up the volume. There was clearly a thudding sound as if something had been knocked over. Before I could think much, my Sheltie lifted its head, growling towards the window. It had never growled like that before, a low, fierce, wild sound. I turned to look. Outside the window was darkness and tree branches swaying in the wind. But among the leaves, I noticed something standing still too big to be a wild animal, too motionless to be a person. I held my breath. The entity didn't move, didn't breathe, but I felt its presence. A wave of cold air ran down my spine. Then it took a step back and vanished into the night, as if it melted into thin air. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat upright in my chair, clutching a metal stick, my eyes glued to the screen. My dog was curled tightly at my feet, panting and wide awake. The next morning, I decided to call the clairvoyant, the one who had warned me before. I told her everything. She was silent for a long moment, then said in a low voice, "He's getting closer. The girl weakens whenever he manifests. If you don't act, he will claim this place forever." After the call with the clairvoyant, I felt as if time was accelerating. What she said kept echoing in my head. He will claim this place forever. There was no longer any doubt. I was living on cursed land not by coincidence, but by a series of restless spirits and unatoned crimes. I began to research the history of this land more thoroughly. Both properties had previously been part of the large farm. From the town library to local archives, I unearthed some vague but disturbing information. Around the early 20th century, this area was home to a small indigenous community, mostly of the Klamath tribe. There was a forgotten incident. A young girl from the village mysteriously disappeared. Legend had it that she was abducted by a local white man, a powerful landowner. No one ever saw her again. Sometime later, the man also vanished without a trace. Many believed the girl was buried in the forest, right near the spot the clairvoyant had mentioned. A shiver ran down my spine. Every detail matched chillingly the harmed girl, the lingering spirit in the forest, and a tall entity in the form of a man, but no longer human. I decided to return to the forest behind the house where the clairvoyant had said the girl was buried underground. I didn't bring any complex equipment, just a flashlight, a voice recorder, and an amulet the clairvoyant had sent me the day before. It was an overcast afternoon, with heavy clouds and no wind. Everything was eerily quiet. When I reached the clearing in the forest, where there were unusually stacked rocks, I clearly felt an invisible pressure weighing on my shoulders. The voice recorder I had placed on a rotten tree stump began emitting strange static. Even though the battery was full and it had never had problems before, I whispered, "If you are here, I want to help you. I am not the one who harmed you." But he is coming back. Silence. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Then, from deep within the forest, a cold gust of wind swept through, making me shiver. Not a natural wind, it was as cold as the breath of someone who had just returned from the dead. I looked down at the voice recorder. The small screen was flickering. I stopped recording and played it back. Static. Click. Don't let him. Come back. I froze. The voice was small, trembling, but clearly that of a young woman. I couldn't be mistaken, and it wasn't my voice. I left the forest immediately afterward, my hands trembling. On the way back, I felt someone walking behind me unseen, unheard, but I knew. That feeling couldn't be explained. That night, I fell asleep in my study, the faint light from the computer screen still casting on the ceiling, around 3 a.m. I was awakened by furious barking. My dog stood at the living room door, growling, its whole body rigid. I walked out, my heart pounding. The front window was wide open, although I clearly remembered having latched it securely. There were no signs of forced entry, but the smell in the air was different. A scent of damp, old earth, as if freshly dug from a deep grave. I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside again. This time, I didn't hide. I stepped out onto the porch, carrying my flashlight and the amulet hanging around my neck. The light from the flashlight pierced through the trees, and I saw him. The tall man, still wearing his old suit and broken top hat, but his face was now clear, no eyes, just two deep, dark hollows. His skin was cracked like dry earth, his mouth wide open in a chilling smile. He said nothing, just stood there, as if daring me to approach. I didn't move. My hand gripped the amulet tightly. He slowly raised his hand, pointing towards the forest behind the house. Then he turned, glided away, and vanished into the darkness. I understood he wanted me to go there, but for what? I couldn't sleep again after he disappeared. My entire body felt like it had been submerged in cold water. Every nerve was incredibly tense. The next morning, I called the clairvoyant again. Her voice was hoarse, tired, as if she too had just experienced a terrible night. "I saw him," I said, "right outside the yard. He wants me to go into the forest." She was silent for a long moment, then replied, "If he allowed you to see him, it means he's playing his final game. The girl is trying to contact you, but she can do nothing if his spirit still occupies this land. What do I have to do? You have to bring something of hers back to her resting place." I froze. "What do you mean? You kept a piece of her during your encounter last year. You picked up something from the forest, didn't you?" I tried to remember last autumn when I was hunting in that area. I had picked up a broken wooden comb, moss-covered and rotten. I thought it was left behind by someone long ago. I brought it home, cleaned it, and still kept it in my desk drawer since that night. Everything began. I opened the drawer, picked up the comb, the moment my hand touched it. A wave of coldness emanated from my fingertips, as if the object was sucking all warmth around it. I distinctly felt a wave of sorrow, a quiet helplessness rising from the depths of that small object. That night, I decided to return to the forest. This time, I prepared more carefully a flashlight, a dagger, holy salt to scatter, holy water sent by the clairvoyant, and the wooden comb wrapped in white cloth. I brought my dog along even though it was still trembling. I felt it wouldn't leave me alone. The sky was overcast, the moon almost completely hidden by clouds. I followed the old path, going deep into the clearing where the rocks still stood like silent grave guardians. I placed the comb in the middle of the clearing, scattering salt around it to form a circle. My hands trembled as I poured holy water onto the stone in the center of the circle. I prayed, "If you are here, please take back what is yours. I come not to harm you." Suddenly, a great wind rose, so strong it almost blew me over. Leaves swirled in circles. Branches shrieked like screams. The dog let out a long howl, then fell silent. And then I saw her, a slender figure with long hair and a dirty, tattered white dress, stood on the other side of the salt circle. Her face wasn't clear, only a faint light emanating from the comb, illuminating eyes filled with despair. She reached out her hand but did not cross the salt circle, though she clearly didn't speak. I heard her voice echo in my mind. "He won't let me go." I trembled. "I will protect you. I will end him." As soon as I finished speaking, the ground trembled slightly from the edge of the forest. A dark shadow gradually materialized. He, the man in the hat, nearly 7 feet tall, stepped out from behind a large tree. This time, he didn't glide. He walked very slowly, each step heavy as if dragging invisible shackles. The light from my flashlight became pale, flickering as if swallowed by something. I drew my dagger, my hand slick with sweat. He stopped about 20 steps from me, and then he spoke, his voice like rotten wood grinding against stone, deep and fractured. "She is mine. You don't belong here," I yelled. "She doesn't belong to you. You killed her, and now you want to drag her soul down with you." He didn't answer, but I clearly felt his rage spread through the air. The surrounding trees began to shriek. Leaves scattered. The ground beneath me grew hot, as if a torrent of evil energy was surging from hell. I threw holy water at him. The water sizzled, and he shrieked, not a human sound, but like hundreds of voices screaming intertwined. The wind tore everything apart. The comb flew out of the salt circle, landing at his feet. I lunged forward, snatching the comb back just in time. The very moment my hand touched it, he swung his arm. An entire nearby tree snapped, falling just inches from me. I stood within the salt circle, holding the comb towards the girl's shadow. "Please, take it. This is yours. I cannot keep it forever." She stepped forward, her bare feet touching the edge of the salt circle, crossing it for the first time, no longer a wandering spirit, but as if released. She took the comb, and a faint light spread from her fingers onto the object. The ground stopped trembling. The wind ceased. He roared one last time, lunging towards me, but the moment he touched the edge of the salt circle, he was repelled as if hitting an invisible wall. His colossal form shattered like ashes in midair, then vanished in the silent breeze. The girl turned to me, nodded, and then slowly dissolved like morning mist, leaving the air light and a faint scent of pine wood. I stood there, speechless. The first confrontation was over, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the end, because looking towards the deep forest, I saw a flickering red speck of light like another pair of eyes. Waiting, I stood silently within the salt circle. The light from the comb had vanished, and the forest wind was now just a damp, cold whisper in my ear. Everything seemed to have ended, but my body still trembled, partly from fear, partly because I knew it wasn't over. I stepped out of the circle, my flashlight now as weak as a dying flame. My dog silently followed, its eyes still fixed on the empty space where the entity had stood. As I left the clearing, I glanced back one last time. All that remained was an old rock with the salt circle faded by the wind. But there was something strange. I bent down and saw a footprint in the dirt, unusually large, deep, facing towards me. Not mine, not his, but of someone or something that had stood silently at the edge of the salt circle, watching from beginning to end. I took a picture, though I knew no camera could capture them clearly, as I was leaving the forest. My phone suddenly vibrated, not a message, nor a call. It was a voice recording. I played it, and my ears nearly froze. The recording contained heavy, raspy, gasping breaths, like someone dying. Then a whisper, very close to my ear. Not him, there's another one. My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't recorded anything. No one else was there. So who sent this recording? Back home. I couldn't sleep. I turned on the security cameras to check the recordings from last night. The living room, the front yard, the hallway. There was almost nothing except at 3:12 a.m., precisely when I was still in the forest. The hallway camera recorded a fleeting shadow. It had no clear shape, just a hazy black wisp, gliding horizontally, and the motion sensor light didn't turn on at all. Immediately after, the camera lost signal for exactly 6 seconds. 6 seconds later, the image returned, and there was a faint handprint on the lens, an unusually large hand, with long, withered fingers, like wrinkled animal skin. It couldn't have been human. I wiped the lens, but the handprint remained, imprinted inside the lens, as if it had looked back at me. I sent this recording to the clairvoyant. She called back almost immediately. Her voice panicked. My God, it has set its eyes on you. The one who just dissipated in the forest wasn't the only perpetrator. He was merely a minion. There's something else, older, stronger, that has manipulated everything. What the ancients called Otanaska, the soul devourer. I was speechless. What is Otanaska? She sighed, as if reluctant to speak. It's an ancient spirit fed by resentment. It incites people to do evil, then devours the souls of the weaker. It doesn't kill, it makes others kill each other so that all belong to it. She paused for a moment, then quietly asked, "Have you ever seen a pair of red eyes?" I remembered the red speck of light in the forest, the eyes staring at me after the girl vanished. "Yes," I said. "I have." Right after she dissipated, she was silent for a very long time, then spoke as if in a prayer. "Then, you have entered the real confrontation. My boy." I hung up. I sat alone in the kitchen, all the lights on, my dog lying close to my feet, not moving. The wind outside still rustled, like a lingering, unfinished breath. I thought I had saved the girl, thought everything was over. But it seems that was just the prelude. The entity behind it all is still out there, and it is getting closer. I didn't sleep that night. It felt like something was watching from every nook and cranny of the house. Every time the lights flickered or the floorboards creaked, my heart pounded. The next morning, I decided to do something I should have done long ago: research the history of the land where my 2 properties are located. On the dining table, I opened an old county map I'd obtained from the local library. The yellowed paper clearly stated this area was once part of a nearly 500-acre farm, belonging to the Hatfield family, the first white settlers here in the late 19th century. But strangely, the northern edge of the farm where I had encountered the Native American girl's spirit was marked as strictly forbidden area. Note, cultural dispute. I typed into the computer, searching for the name Hatfield and land disputes with indigenous people. An old record appeared blurry, but still legible. Hatfield versus Skagani tribe, 1893. The Skagani tribe, I had never heard of them. While researching further, I found an archived article, just a few lines, a mysterious disappearance. 5 members of the Skagani tribe never returned after being accused by Mr. Hatfield's men of stealing livestock. No trial, no search, no one was charged. I swallowed hard. My heart began to pound. Could it be that among those 5 was the girl? I printed the article and took it to the North property where I had encountered the tall Native American man's spirit, with the broken top hat, as I carefully observed each room. I suddenly remembered the hallway where that spirit had appeared. The wall at the end of the hallway had a thin wooden frame, painted over as if to conceal something. I carefully pried it open with a knife. A rusty iron vent appeared. I looked inside, pitch black, using my flashlight. I saw a small notebook nestled at the bottom of the crevice. Pulling it out was almost miraculous. The leather cover was rough, old, with no title. The first page read, Martha Hatfield's Journal, 1893. I almost held my breath as I turned each page. Martha was the farm owner's wife. She recorded her feelings when her husband took his men to deal with livestock thieves, and the strange things that began to happen afterward. The first night after the chase, I saw a shadow standing outside the fence. Not my husband, not the farmhands. It was a tall man, wearing a top hat. I ran out, but he vanished. My daughter, Lila, says there's a dark-haired sister standing outside her bedroom window, singing her lullabies every night. I didn't believe it until I heard the song on a moonless night. I heard that among the Skagani tribe. There's a ritual called soul bonding. If the souls of the tormented dead aren't appeased, they won't pass on. They'll stay to call for revenge, and when the hatred is deep enough, Otanaska will be summoned. That name made me stop reading. So Otanaska wasn't made up by the clairvoyant. It was real, at least in the beliefs of the Skagani tribe. I flipped a few more pages, but the journal abruptly stopped at a difficult-to-read passage. December 23rd. Leela no longer sings. The singing now comes from the kitchen. I lock myself in my room, praying. But I hear a man whispering my name right behind me. I don't dare turn around. There were no more pages. I felt a cold dread run down my spine. If I found this journal, then what Martha feared might still be here that evening. I decided to contact the clairvoyant again when I told her about the journal. Her voice hitched for a long moment. "You need to meet someone," she said. "His name is Tobias Red Elk, the last descendant of Skagani, currently living about 50 miles away, near the shallow lake region. But you must be careful. Otanaska doesn't want you to get close to the truth." I set off the next morning. The winding dirt road led me to a small wooden house at the edge of a pine forest. Mr. Tobias was around 70, his eyes sharp and deep, as if looking right through me. When I handed him the journal and mentioned Otanaska, he showed no surprise. He simply poured tea, sat down, and asked, "Have you ever seen anyone burned without burning?" The question bewildered me. "What do you mean?" Mr. Tobias spoke in a low voice. "Otanaska is an entity that cannot be destroyed by fire, water, or earth. It is the crystallization of unacknowledged pain. Every unjustly killed person adds to its power. And now, you are living on the very land that nourishes it." I recounted everything I had witnessed the girl's spirit. The tall man, the traces, the shadow, the whispers. Mr. Tobias closed his eyes for a very long time, then said, "The girl you saw is Nami, daughter of the Skagani chief. She was murdered in the forest by a white man. No one knows his identity for sure. But after that, 3 other members of the tribe also disappeared. One remaining person, Nami's close friend, performed a summoning ritual, hoping to bring Nami back, but instead of Nami, Otanaska arrived. He stood up, opened a drawer, and took out a round object made of black stone intricately carved with swirling symbols and a serpent's eye. This is the talisman of truth, the only object that can lead you to the source of the suffering. But it can only be used once, and when used, you will be clearly seen by him. No more hiding, no more defense. I took the object, feeling it icy cold. In Mr. Tobias's eyes, I saw a look of regret, as if he knew something I hadn't yet grasped. That evening, I returned home. The sky was starless. The wind was calm. But I felt thousands of eyes watching down. I sat alone, placing the stone on the table, contemplating what I was facing. If Otanaska was truly the source, I couldn't keep hiding. I had to go to where it all began. The forest, the broken stone well, where Nami was buried beneath the red tree. I held the stone and stepped into the darkness. I held the icy stone in my palm, each swirl and serpent carving seeming to breathe faintly. The darkness before me was thick. Even though the sky was clear and the moon hung low behind me, the old forest behind the north property now felt like a gateway to another world. Toby walked close beside me, neither barking nor whimpering. He just stared straight down the path as if he too knew what awaited us. Every footstep on the decaying leaves made an excessively loud rustle. There was no sound of insects, no hooting owls, just the forest wind and absolute silence. I remembered Mr. Tobias's words, "Only use the stone once, and when used, he will see you." I still didn't fully understand the meaning of that statement until everything began to change. The moment I approached the clearing where the red tree stood tall, that strange tree whose bark seemed to bleed under the moonlight, I felt my palm grow hot. The stone began to glow, a faint greenish light, like phosphorescence in a dream. Slowly spread from the swirling carving. I knelt, placing the stone on the ground right by the tree roots. There was no ritual, no incantation, but the earth trembled slightly, as if something beneath was awakening. Toby let out a soft whine, stepping back. His fur bristled, and I sensed something terribly wrong was happening. Then, the ground beneath my feet cracked open. Not a large crack, just a small fissure, but from it, thin wisps of smoke began to rise. The smell was acrid, chilling, like the ashes of a cremated body. A shriek of wind tore through the forest, but this time, it wasn't like wind, it was a voice, the whispering voices of dozens, hundreds of people, their words unclear, but filled with resentment and moans, like pain that had never been voiced. Then she appeared. I don't know how to describe it, because Nami's form wasn't a physical image, but like a reflection from the Earth's memory. A young Native American girl, with long hair to her waist, eyes sad and profound, stood next to the red tree, not touching the ground, not touching me, but I knew she saw me. I opened my mouth, intending to call her name Nami, but a sound cut me off. Behind me, not far, were footsteps, very heavy footsteps, slow, as if someone was walking in iron shackles. I whirled around. Toby was now snarling, ears flattened, retreating behind me. The stone abruptly dimmed, and then he appeared, a tall man, taller than anyone I had ever seen. He wore a broken top hat, covering nearly half his face, but what I clearly saw were his eyes, no pupils, just too deep, black hollows, as if looking into my very marrow. He stood there, in the forest, not speaking, but he didn't need to. His presence was something both physical and conceptual. unresolved hatred. "Otanaska," I whispered. He tilted his head, not a gesture of curiosity, but rather as if sniffing me. And then, without warning, he lunged. I quickly grabbed the stone and ran in the opposite direction. Toby stayed close beside me, his footsteps echoing behind me like thunder, even though his feet didn't touch the ground. Each step caused a tremor, sending leaves flying and cracking the earth. I don't remember how I ran. Sometimes it felt like I was running and crying, praying, and getting lost. I dashed through the old path, stumbling a few times, and only dared to stop when I could no longer hear his footsteps. Toby stood in front of me, growling, his fur bristling. I sat, gasping, clutching the stone tightly. My hand was scraped and bleeding, and when I looked at the blood, I saw something strange. The blood was smoking, not actual smoke, but like my own soul being marked. Otanaska had seen me. Now I could no longer hide. The next morning, I returned home disheveled. I couldn't remember if I had slept. All I knew was that when I opened my eyes, all the furniture in the house was disturbed. There were no signs of forced entry. Windows were locked, the front door was intact, but tables and chairs were askew. Cabinets were wide open. The mirror was covered with a black cloth, though I hadn't done that. And on the mirror, there was a message written in ash, "Speak the truth." I called Mr. Tobias again. His voice was still deep, but seemed urgent. "You've been marked by him. There's no turning back. To survive, you must complete the final ritual." "What ritual?" "Freeing the confined soul, Nami." I sat in silence for a moment. "How?" "Find her true burial place. Place the stone on her heart. Speak the killer's name. If it's correct, she's free. If it's wrong, Otanaska will confine the soul of the one who spoke falsely in her place." "I don't know his name." Mr. Tobias was silent. Then he sighed. "There is a place that might hold the answer. The old chapel on the Hatfield property. It's in ruins now. But if Martha kept a journal, she might have left something there as well." I took out the old map, found the chapel's location, just a small dot in the southwest, near the old farm's border. I brought the stone, a flashlight, my notebook, and Toby, always my loyal companion. That afternoon, I arrived. The chapel was in ruins, with only a few stone walls and a moss-covered brick floor remaining, but in the middle of the rubble, beneath a wooden board, I saw a cellar door made of oak, carved with the words, "In manus tuas, Domine." I used a crowbar to pry it open. Beneath was a rotten wooden staircase, leading down to a small room reeking of dampness and mold. I went down, sweeping my flashlight everywhere. On the stone wall hung a painting almost completely faded, but I saw a man's figure, dressed in farm clothes, holding a whip, standing next to a small, blurry shadow like a small girl tied up. At the bottom corner of the painting was written, "The Fateful June Night." I swept the flashlight to another corner. There was a small wooden chest, its lock rotten. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter fragment. I can no longer remain silent. It was not theft. It was murder. And my husband, he himself did it to that girl. His name is Thomas Hatfield. May God forgive his soul. Martha. I froze. That name, the true name of Nami's killer. I copied it down, then closed the chest, taking the letter fragment with me. Toby kept turning his head, as if sensing something approaching, and so did I, something seething in the earth. I had to perform the ritual that evening. I returned to the red tree. This time, I brought the letter, the stone, and a bouquet of wildflowers not for the ritual, But because I believed Nami deserved a sincere apology, I knelt down, gently digging beneath the tree roots. The soil wasn't deep, only about 40 smedum high, and then I saw something, a seashell necklace, and a few small bone fragments. There was no mistake. I placed the stone among the bone fragments, touched it, and whispered Thomas Hatfield. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then, the earth trembled slightly. Toby let out a long howl, and the faint green light from the stone spread out. The red tree seemed to sigh in relief. The smell of ash disappeared. The forest wind gentled. I felt a wave of relief wash over my chest, like when a storm finally breaks. And then I saw Nami. No longer blurry, no longer distant. She looked at me, her eyes no longer sad, but grateful. She gently nodded, then slowly dissolved into the air like morning mist under the moonlight. At the moment, I believed I had done the right thing. But a few hours later, when I returned home, there was a new ash mark on the mirror, just one line of text. Another soul is still unreleased. I sat motionless on the floor, my shoulders shaking from exhaustion and fear. Cold sweat soaked my back. My eyes still fixed on the cracked mirror hanging on the bathroom wall, where just minutes before had been the scene of something I couldn't name. The dark red writing was still there, despite the water from the shower running furiously, seemingly able to wash everything away. Another soul is still unreleased. I don't know who wrote it. Maybe Nami, maybe Otanaska itself, or maybe someone else, still trapped somewhere in this land, in the tragic history of injustices that have never seen the light of day. Toby, my little dog, was trembling in my arms, his fur soaked. I hugged him tightly, as if he were the only thing holding me to reality. I no longer had the courage to stay. The next morning, I called a real estate company. I told them I wanted to sell both properties, the house and the business premises. I don't care about the price, I said on the phone. Just sell it as soon as possible. I packed my belongings, gathered what was left, and left the place that had once been my whole life, taking Toby, the black stone from Tobias Red Elk, and Martha Hatfield's journal. I don't know if those things still have any effect. I just know I need them to remind me that everything that happened wasn't an illusion. I moved to a small town in the north, near the Michigan Lake region. The place is quiet, with many trees and sparse population. People live slowly, are less curious, and most importantly, there's no haunting past lying beneath every inch of land like the area I left behind. The first few weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every gust of wind through the eaves, every shadow slipping through the window, made me imagine the eyes of some spirit still watching. But then, time passed. Toby gradually became cheerful again. I started writing down the entire story in a new journal. As a way to free myself, I still carry some traces, dreams of pine forests, where a barren red tree stands with bloodstains that never dry, whispers in the kitchen, the tall man's shadow standing motionless on the rainy porch. But they are just fragments lingering in my memory. The third month after moving, I received a parcel from the state library. It was a copy of an old newspaper article I had requested, but hadn't had time to pick up before leaving. The article, from 1894, was brief and unnoticed. Local residents report strange lights appearing many nights in the area at the northern edge of the old Hatfield farm. Some hear singing in the night. A few people say they saw a long-haired woman standing by the stone well. Motionless for hours, I folded the paper. Perhaps Nami is still there. Perhaps Otanaska hasn't dissipated. But now, I no longer have the right or the strength to continue that journey. I only hope that the girl's soul and the souls of her friends will find what they deserved to be heard, to be recognized, and to find peace. I have told this story to a few close friends. They all think I've been overly obsessed. One told me I should see a therapist. Another laughed loudly and said, "You must read too many horror stories." I don't blame them. No one believes in what they haven't seen until they are the ones who open the door. And sometimes there are some doors it's best not to open. One early winter evening, as I was tidying my study, Toby suddenly barked. He was staring at the mirror on the wall, a new mirror, untouched by anyone else. On the mirror's surface, there was a faint misty mark. I walked closer, gently wiping it. No words, no traces, just my own reflection, slightly pale and tired. But as I turned away, I swear I heard a very faint voice behind me, echoing from somewhere far away. "Thank you." I didn't dare turn back. I just smiled very slightly, stroked Toby's head, and whispered softly, "Rest in peace, Nami."
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Tina Shadow Stories so you don't miss our next chilling tales. See you in the next video.